Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Vetter. It is 4:46 on Tuesday, March 9th, and I'm going to read you a story. It is sad, isn't it? It is very intense. Not very intense, but intense. So settle in and let's go. 3 years on Rikers without trial by Jennifer Gonerman in 2014, and this was found in the New Yorker, which is a magazine. For as long as Kalief Browder could remember, he had lived in a two-story brick house near the Bronx Zoo. He was the youngest of 7, and except for the oldest 2, all the children were adopted. The mother fostered other kids too. Kalief was the last brought to the family, an older brother told me. By that time, my mom had raised 34 kids. Kalief was the smallest, so my mom called him Peanut. As a child, Browder loved Pokemon, World Wrestling Entertainment, Wednesdays at the Bronx Zoo, and mimicking his brother's workout routine. At 6 years old, he had an 8-pack, his brother said. For high school, Browder went to a small progressive academy. Staff remembered him as a fun guy, the kid others wanted to be around. Occasionally, he would sneak into a friend's classroom and stay until the teacher caught on. His report cards were full of C's, but another teacher said, "I thought he was very smart." In the early hours of Saturday, May 15, 2010, 10 days before his 17th birthday, Kalief Browder and a friend were returning from a party in the Bronx. They walked past bakeries and cafes with metal shutters down for the night. As they passed East 186th Street, Browder saw a police car driving towards them. More cars arrived, and Browder and his friend found themselves squinting into a spotlight. An officer said a man just reported they had robbed him. "I didn't rob anybody," Browder replied. "You can check my pockets." The officers searched them but found nothing. One walked back to the alleged victim and returned with a new story. The man said they robbed him not that night, but 2 weeks earlier. The police handcuffed the teens and put them in a squad car. "What am I being charged for?" Browder asked. "I didn't do anything." They said, "We're going to the precinct. Most likely, you'll go home." The pair were fingerprinted and locked up. A few hours later, an officer opened the door. Browder jumped up. "I can leave now?" Instead, they were taken to central booking at the Bronx County Criminal Court. Browder already had run-ins with the police, including an incident months earlier when an officer saw him take a delivery truck for a joyride and crash into a parked car. Browder was charged with grand larceny. He told me his friends drove the truck and he only watched, but he figured he had no defense, and so he pleaded guilty. The judge gave him probation and ensured he wouldn't have a criminal record. Late Saturday, 17 hours after police picked Browder up, an officer and a prosecutor interrogated him. He maintained his innocence. The next day, he was led into a courtroom where he was charged with robbery, grand larceny, and assault. The judge released his friend, allowing him free while the case moved on. But because Browder was still on probation from the truck incident, the judge ordered him locked up and set bail at $3,000. His family couldn't pay it, and Browder found himself on a Department of Correction bus. He fought panic. The bus made its way along a long, narrow bridge to Rikers Island. Of 8 million people in New York City, 11,000 are in jails, most of them on Rikers, an island in the East River. The island has 10 jails, 8 for men, 1 for women, and 1 so old and worn down it cannot be used. Sorry, I had to turn off the oven. When Browder arrived, the jail held 600 boys, 16 to 18. Attacks by officers and inmates were rampant. The report had a long list of injuries: broken jaws, broken orbital bones, broken noses, bone fractures, and lacerations needing stitches. Browder's family could not afford an attorney, so the judge appointed a lawyer named Brendan O'Meara to represent him. He said it was a straightforward case. There was just the memory of 1 alleged victim. But Bronx criminal courts are chronically overwhelmed. There are not enough judges and court staff to handle the workload. In 2010, Browder's case was one of 5,695 felonies. The problem is made worse by defense attorneys who drag out cases to improve odds of winning, judges who allow endless delays, and prosecutors who are constantly unprepared. Although the Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to a speedy and public trial in the Bronx, speedy justice barely exists. Browder soon realized he was not going to make friends. He was in a dorm where 50 teenage boys slept in one room, each with a bucket to store possessions. "Their conversations bored me," he said. He told me. "The inmates were only interested in crimes they committed and girls they did." Browder noticed other inmates scrubbing their clothes by hand, using their bucket and soap. That day, he told himself, "I don't know how I'm going to live in this place." Browder's mother visited every weekend. He would hand her dirty clothes and get a stack of fresh clothes in return. She also put money in an account so he could buy snacks. He knew this made him a target for other prisoners who would take any opportunity to steal from someone else's bucket, so he slept with his head on top of his bucket. To survive, he decided the best strategy was to keep to himself and work out. Before Rikers, he told me, that's when I decided I wanted to get big. The day room was ruled by a gang leader and his friends, who controlled prison phones and dictated who could watch TV and who sat on the floor. I'd say, I'm not sitting on the floor, Browder said, and then they'll come with 5 or 6 dudes. They swing on me. I'd have to fight back. There was no escape, no protection, and a suspicion that some of the guards had an agreement with the gang members. One night, a group of guards lined the inmates up against a wall, trying to figure out who was responsible for an earlier fight. They're asking us why we jumped those guys, he said, and as they're talking, they're punching us one by one. Browder said he had nothing to do with the fight, but officers still beat him. Noses were leaking, faces bloody, eyes swollen, he said. Afterward, the officers gave teens a choice: go to the medical clinic or go back to bed. But if inmates went to the clinic and told medical staff what happened, officers would write up charges and get them sent to solitary confinement. I just told them I'll act like nothing happened, Browder said. So they didn't send us back to the clinic. They didn't write anything up. They just sent us back. On July 28, 2010, Browder was awakened at 4:30. He was handcuffed to another inmate and put on a bus. At the Bronx Hall of Justice, they waited to see a judge. 74 days had passed since his arrest. He had missed his 17th birthday, the end of his sophomore year, his second year in high school, and half the summer. A grand jury voted to indict Browder. The complaint alleged he and his friend had robbed an immigrant named Roberto Bautista, chasing him, pushing him against a fence, and taking his backpack. Bautista told the police his backpack contained a credit card, a debit card, a digital camera, an iPod Touch, and $700. Browder was also accused of punching Bautista in the face. A clerk read the charges: robbery in the second degree and other crimes, and asked Browder, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty? Not guilty, Browder said. Kalief Browder told O'Meara, his lawyer, he would never plead guilty and wanted to go to trial. O'Meara assumed the defense would be, they got the wrong kid. The accusation had been made a week after the alleged robbery, and the victim had later changed his mind about when it occurred. With each day, Browder imagined he was getting closer to trial. But for the trial to start, both defense attorney and prosecutor have to be ready. The court clerk searches for a free trial judge, and jury selection begins. Not long after Browder was indicted, a district attorney sent a notice of readiness, stating that people are ready for trial. The case was set for December 10th, but it did not start then. On January 28, 2011, Browder's 258th day in jail, he went to the courthouse again. This time, the prosecutor said, the people are not ready. We are requesting 1 week. The next court date, March 9th, was 6 weeks away. Browder didn't even go to trial that year. The more a case drags on, the greater the pressure to give up and plead guilty. By early 2012, prosecutors offered Browder a deal: 3 years in prison for a guilty plea. He refused. I want to go to trial, he told O'Meara, even though he knew if he lost, he could get up to 15 years. Some inmates plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit to put an end to it all, but Browder was determined to get his day in court. Browder soon made his first trip to solitary confinement, known as the Bing. It lasted 2 weeks and followed a scuffle with another inmate. He was throwing shoes at people. I told him to stop, Browder said. I took a sneaker and I threw it, and he got mad. He swung, and we started fighting. Between 2007 and 2013, the number of solitary confinement beds increased by more than 60%, and a report found nearly 27% of teenage inmates were in solitary. A prisoner doesn't leave his cell except to go to rec, the shower, the visit room, the clinic, or court. When he leaves, he is handcuffed and strip searched. Summer is the worst time to be in the Bing. There is no air conditioning. Browder would spend all day smelling his own sweat until his next shower. The Bing had only cell study. An officer slid worksheets under the door, collected them, and returned them with marks. Some inmates never did the worksheets, but Browder told himself, I'm already in jail, I may as well do them. Browder was in the Bing for 10 months in 2011. When Browder first went to Rikers, his brother advised him to get sent to solitary when he felt at risk. I told him, when you get in and don't feel safe, do whatever you can to get into solitary, the brother said. It's better than coming home with a slice on your face. Even in solitary, however, violence was a threat. Verbal spats with officers could escalate. At one point, Browder said, a correction officer told me he wanted to fight. That was his way of handling it. He challenged him to fight in the shower where there are no surveillance cameras. So I agreed to it. The next day, the officer escorted him to the shower, but before they got there, the officer knocked him down. He put his forearm on my face on the floor and started punching me in the leg. Browder isn't the first inmate to make such an allegation. Browder's brother reconsidered his advice when he saw him in the visiting area. For one thing, Browder was losing weight. He said, "They're not feeding me," the brother told me. He looked skinny. In solitary, food arrived through a slot 3 times a day. For a teenager, portions were never big enough. When conversation turned to life in jail, he's like, "I don't know how long I'll be able to take this." Browder got out of the Bing in the fall of 2011, but he went back. On the night of February 8th, 2012, his 634th day, he said to himself, "I can't take it anymore. I give up." That night, he tried to hang himself. He was taken to the clinic, then returned to solitary. Browder told me everything was removed except his white plastic bucket. On February 17th, he was shuttled to the courthouse again. For more than a year, he had heard excuses about why his trial was delayed. The prosecutor was on another trial, was on jury duty, or was currently on vacation. Browder's lawyer requested March 16th, and the judge scheduled it. Browder was still on Rikers Island in June of 2012 when his classmates collected diplomas, and in September when some of them enrolled in college. In the fall, prosecutors offered a new deal. If he pleaded guilty, he'd get 2.5 years in prison, which meant because of time he already served, he could go home soon. 99 out of 100 would have taken the offer that gets you out of jail, O'Meara told me. He just said, "Nah, I'm not taking it." He didn't flinch, never talked about it. He was not taking a plea. Back at Rikers, prisoners were stunned. "You're bugging," they said. "If that was me, I would have said I did it and went home ASAP." Browder knew it was a gamble. Even though he was innocent, he could lose a trial. "I used to think maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm going too far," he recalled, "but I did what I thought was right." By 2012, Browder had been in jail for 961 days and stood before 8 different judges. He always maintained his composure, never berating his attorney or yelling in court. O'Meara was impressed. "I can't imagine most people sitting for 3 years and not becoming upset with their attorney," he says. He just never complained. Privately, though, Browder was angry. He would say, "These guys are just playing with my case." On May 29th, Browder's 31st court date, the judge peered from the bench. "The district attorney cannot proceed," she said. "It is our intention to dismiss the case." Browder could not believe this. His battle for innocence had ended. No trial, no jury, no verdict. An attorney explained that Bautista, the man who accused Browder, had gone back to Mexico. The district attorney's office tried to arrange his brother to testify, but then they lost contact with the brother too. "We are unable to meet our burden of proof at trial," the prosecutor wrote. Browder had missed his junior year of high school, his senior year, graduation, the prom. 4 days earlier, he had turned 20. The next afternoon, he had walked out of jail, a single thought in his mind: "I'm going home." He took the bus to Queens Plaza, then 2 subways to the Bronx, and his euphoria went away. Being around so many people felt strange. He had been in solitary confinement for the last 17 months. This is the Bronx. Browder moved home with his mother and brothers. His clothes no longer fit. He had grown an inch and become brawnier. Many of his former pastimes, video games, watching movies, shooting hoops, no longer engaged him. He wanted to spend time alone with the door closed. Sometimes he found himself pacing as he had done in solitary. When he saw old friends, he saw their accomplishments and what he had not achieved. No high school diploma, no job, no money, no apartment. Before jail, he used to sit on his steps with his friends, and when girls would walk by, he'd call out, "Hi, what are you doing? Where's the party at? Can I go with you?" Now, if she managed to get a girl's number, the first conversation would always go the same. She'd ask if he was working, and he would feel anxiety rise. Once he revealed he was living at home without a job or diploma, they look at me like I ain't worth nothing, like I ain't shit. It hurts to have people look at you like that. He could explain he'd been wrongfully arrested, but the truth felt complicated, too raw and personal. "If I tell them the story, then I got to hear 100 questions," he said. "It gets emotional for me, and those emotions I don't feel comfortable with." One of his relatives called an attorney named Paul V. Prestia. "It could have been tried in court in days," Prestia told me. "I don't know how every prosecutor let this happen. It's like he didn't exist." Prestia filed the lawsuit for Kalief Browder against the city, the NYPD, the Bronx District Attorney, and the Department of Correction. Kalief was deprived of his right to a fair and speedy trial, his education, and his entire adolescence, he says. Browder doesn't know how many days he was in solitary, and Rikers officials won't divulge details, but he remembers it was about 700, 800. One afternoon, I sat with Browder in a restaurant in Lower Manhattan. He is 5'7" with a high forehead, tired eyes, and a few wisps of hair above his upper lip. "Being home is way better than being in jail," he told me. "But in my mind, I feel like I'm still in jail because I'm still feeling the side effects." When I asked for an interview, he was reluctant, but agreed. We always met in Manhattan. He didn't want to meet in the Bronx and felt more comfortable speaking where nobody heard him, knew him. He always wore the same clothes, a hoodie with the hood down, a pair of earbuds, one in an ear and the other swinging free, beads dangling down from his neck for fashion. When I asked about Rikers, he surprised me with his willingness to speak. At times, he seemed unable to stop, as if he had been craving the chance to tell somebody what he had endured. Other times, remembering seemed physically painful. He would fall silent, drop his gaze, and shake his head. He tried to stay busy. He sat in classes, searched for a job, and attended counseling. This March, he learned he passed the GED on his first try. I got some of my pride back, he told me. He got a job as a security guard. Not his dream position, but it would serve while he was looking for something better. Most days, progress he made coming home did not feel like progress. It's been a year now, and I got a part-time job, and I got my GED, he said. But that's nothing. People tell me because I have this lawsuit against the city, I'm all right. But I'm not all right. I'm messed up. I know I might get some money from this case, but that's not going to help me mentally. I'm scarred. That's how I feel. Because there are things that changed about me, and they might not go back. Browder started classes at Bronx Community College, but even now, he thinks about Rikers every day. Flashbacks are frequent. Almost anything triggers them. It might be the sight of a police cruiser or something more subtle. When his mother cooks rice and chili, he remembers the rice and chili on Rikers. And suddenly he is back in the Bing, recalling when he'd have to wait 12 hours for his next meal. Even with his friends, things just aren't the same. I'm trying to break out of my shell, but I guess there is no shell. This is just how I am, quiet and distant, he says. I don't like being this way, but it's natural to me now. Every night before he sleeps, he checks every window in the house is locked. When he rides the subway, he feels terrified. I might be attacked. I might be robbed, he says, because in jail, there's all type of criminal stuff that goes on. No matter how hard he tries, he cannot forget what he saw. Inmates stealing, officers attacking teens, blood on the floor. Now that I'm aware, I'm paranoid, he says. I feel like I was robbed of my happiness. In 2013, Kalief Browder was released after 3 years in jail. This article was written in 2014. He attempted suicide multiple times, finally succeeding in 2015 at his mother's home. His family, however, was given $3.3 million through a lawsuit against New York City in January of 2019.